Now, the recent publication of the World Thoroughbred Rankings has been a discursive point on the forums on Twitter and discussed on Racing UK as well. We're going to extend that discussion now in the company of Timeform's Jamie Lynch, who joins us. Hi, Jamie, how are you?
Good afternoon, Alex. I'm very well, very excited after this week's proceedings.
Last time I read one of your articles on the old interweb, you were talking about Descartes.
Yeah, I'm a very, much like this debate, I'm a very diverse sort of character. Yeah, I heard you praising that article once. I hope this is in the case of good cop, bad cop, and you're buttering me up in preparation for Chris. Chris leaning over the desk and pinning me down.
I mean, we're not going to make it a World Thoroughbreds rankings versus Timeform debate. We'll use them as comparison, and we'll look at both sets of ratings. But what about the sort of recalibration of the ratings historically? What's been Timeform's take on that? What's been your take on that?
Well, personally speaking, I know that there has been quite a lot of negativity, some outrage in some quarters, but I think that generally speaking, it is a positive move. Now, it might seem like pretty drastic action to go back in time effectively and reassess all these horses, but there are positives to come out of it. It's a positive that, firstly, there has been an acknowledgement that the levels weren't quite right. Secondly, it's a positive the way it's been done, in that it's a historical undertaking when, you know, arguably it would have been easier to just nudge up Frankel's rating slightly and pretend like everything's okay. And thirdly, it's a positive that from now on, the ratings and the end-of-season rankings, which are of increasing importance, we've seen that through discussions this week, that they're going to be given the due scrutiny and detailed attention to make them a really valid process, because they are very valid and important to the long-term future of the sport. Is
it another way of saying one of two things, Jamie? One, that modern methods of rating horses in terms of mathematics and distances, that they've become more refined and are more accurate?
Possibly so, and you do need that refinement, and you do need to move with the times, so to speak. But I think that on the other side of the coin, the beauty of Timeform and our rankings is that we've used the same methodology and the same process of handicapping more or less from day one, and that puts us in a good position to judge one generation against the next, which is obviously the whole reason this has come out is because of Frankel and his brilliance. And when you get a horse like Frankel, who is so clearly and so manifestly ahead of his contemporaries, the only way to judge him is against his counterparts from yesteryear. But so, although it's two factors really. One, yes, you have to move with the times, and there are developments to be made in handicapping, including future ones, hopefully, with the induction of statistical analysis and sectional times. But on the other hand, you do need that robust, rigid, set procedure in place just to help you judge one generation against the next.
In a sense, people at Timeform thinking, well, the World Thoroughbred Rankings are essentially agreeing with where you've been at and the way you've been doing things for the last 50 years?
Well, yes, it's certainly more in line. Now, perhaps one area of conjecture regards the process which they've undertaken is that they took the view that the horses going back several decades are perhaps too high, whereas we would suggest that actually the slippage has occurred more recently rather than back in the days of Dancing Brave and Alleged and all those horses, and that perhaps the adjustment needed to be made regards the more recent top horses. And in that point, Frankel is to some extent, despite the adjustment and despite the new procedure and new calculations, we still feel that Frankel is being undersold by the official ratings on a mark of 140. Obviously, we have him on 147, that tops our all-time list, and there is still that £7 discrepancy. So, although there are moves in the right direction, there are still some pretty obvious differences between our final analysis and also our method as well.
The way that it's been achieved, and we're talking about the World Thoroughbred Rankings now, do you have any issues with the way they've gone about it in terms of a sort of pool over a certain period, to take each year and a sample of horses, as it were?
Yeah, I mean, that has been a pretty crude process, and I do understand that they probably have only the data for the top horses involved going back that far. But obviously, ideally, you would take a bigger sample of the horses of that time, the whole horse population, so to speak, which makes the levels you get from that point more clinical and more accurate. And as I said, the point I've already made about perhaps we feel that it was the top horses from recently who were being undersold rather than the ones from yesteryear that were too high. So, yeah, just those 2 points really are maybe the 2 issues that can be seen looking forward. But, you know, hopefully, and I would expect and I would think that this is just part of an ongoing process for the World Thoroughbred rankings. And obviously, this might not be the final analysis and there are still workings and calculations to be made. But as I say, the way that the general direction that things are moving is a positive for the sport.
Okay. And in your eyes, it had to happen? Absolutely,
yeah. It had to happen because, you know, this revision definitely needed to be made because it lacked credibility. That was clear. And the main reason, the main catalyst why all this has come about is Frankel himself. And if part of his legacy is that the World Thoroughbred rankings now measure horses on a more level playing field and more accurately, then that is a great legacy for Frankel to leave, besides the emotions, the memories, the visual impressions that we all had of him. So he's always been a really significant horse for Timeform because of what we came out and said about him in the summer after that Queen Anne performance. But also, he's becoming a real important horse for the sport as a whole and the thoroughbred rankings.
We'll extend the discussion out towards the Timeform global rankings as well, and we'll take a look at the World Thoroughbred rankings alongside those. But I know Chris Dixon has got a question as well. Chris.
Yeah, Jeremy, good evening. I just want to ask Frankel's rating. Obviously, you've stuck him on 147. Is that a rating that you've added anything extra to for ease of victory? I mean, his 140 came in his Queen Anne, didn't he? And you could have probably given him a little bit extra, or is it a bare rating of what he ran to?
Yeah, well, Chris, that's a bare rating of what he achieved on the day. Now, obviously, it's a bit of a dangerous game to go giving horses extra, especially horses of his magnitude and other greats from the past, because the moment that you make it a subjective process, and by that I mean I think he's worth X, Y or Z, then you're taking away really from the true process of handicapping. And we've heard it time and again that it's not really the horse's fault that they cannot achieve the ratings they have done. Frankel was freakish in that he won by a wide margin time after time. I suppose on the other side of the coin you've got See the Stars, who only ever really did enough. He was only rated 140 with Timeform. The suspicion is that he could have achieved more had he been pressed. But in terms of a historical record and a true reflection of what the horse's abilities were on the track, which is all ratings can and all ratings really should do, then you've got to just assess horses on the pure form of what they achieve on each given day when they were at the best.
And I suppose, looking back, that is where the discrepancy going right the way back came between the Dancing Brave Timeform figures and the official figures that were produced, because I think it's become common knowledge that the official figures probably had a little bit extra added on, didn't they?
Yeah.
Whereas I presume the Timeform one never did, and so your figures have stuck to being pretty rigid and never anything else added on.
Yeah, and that's exactly right, and that we think that that is the best way to do it. Obviously, each organisation has its own way of doing things, but certainly the methods that we've used right through in terms of just judging a horse purely on what it does on the track at its best, then that is the one and only true assessment of measurement. And on that measurement, Frankel is the best horse of all time. Obviously, his win in the Jumpmont International when he ran to 142, which was £5 below what he achieved in the Queen Anne by our reckoning. Obviously, as you saw, as Alex saw, as everyone else saw, he was value for extra that day. He could have won more easily had the rider pushed him out or had he really stretched Frankel. But you can't really go ahead and say that outright because of, you're making it a subjective process. But what it does do is it gives you the confidence that 147, he is fully deserving of that, and it is a true reflection of how good Frankel is.
We'll come back to the almost horse-by-horse historical context discussion when we come to the end. But let's look at the Timeform global rankings as well as we come to towards the winter quarters, and we start to reflect on 2012 and look forward to 2013. Frankel, £11 clear of Black Caviar. Cirrus de Ziegler, who of course he beat in the big autumn showpiece at Ascot. Wise Dan bringing in the American challenge. Recalibration beaten by Frankel on several occasions, and some £14 in fear. Full Stone. We're talking about two Group 1 horses here, Group 1 winners. He's a stone below Frankel on the Timeform ratings. We've got a real cross-section of horses at different trips and internationally as well.
Yeah, and that is the beauty of the global rankings and why they are so important, because not only is it an order of merit for the horses in each respective company, but it provides a global picture of where the horses are in their individual jurisdictions and how they match up against each other. Now, obviously, looking at that graphic there, in most years, 136, which is Black Caviar's achievement, 135, Cirrus de Ziegler's best, that is normally the best that a horse can manage. That would normally be the champion horse of that year. And it just goes to show how good Frankel was, that he is so far ahead of the rest in terms of ability. And also, when you look at Acceleration in particular, look at the races that he's won, look at the rating he has. He would have been a top miler in any era, and Frankel obviously dealt with him time and time again, and in that fantastic Queen Anne performance, he dealt with him by 11 lengths.
This is a slightly off-the-cuff question, Jamie, but in terms of race-by-race performance, Frankel's sort of Timeform brilliance or ratings brilliance, have you seen a horse so consistently top level as that in your years? Well,
I know that the race in the UK had a debate just before Christmas about, is Frankel the greatest? Now, ratings are only one part of that judgment, because greatness is a very subjective process, because people have their own criteria for judging greatness, and that includes consistency, versatility, and, to some extent, particularly nowadays, travelling to other countries, taking the roadshow overseas, so to speak. But my answer to is Frankel the greatest would be simply that yes, because using the ratings paradigm, he ran to, whether he ran to 147, 140, 143, that is a point of conjecture, and that is everyone's opinion. What isn't in doubt, what's indisputable, is the amount of times that Frankel produced special performances. And certainly on the figures, he ran to 140 on Timeform, more than any other horse in history. So it's the frequency with which he was producing these performances, like you say, which in my eyes and in Timeform's eyes does entitle him to be regarded as the greatest horse of all time, as well as the horse with the most ability.
And on those 2012 ratings, where would that sort of class of 2012 fit in a historical context, alongside horses like Dancing Brave, Pont Celeb, See the Stars, etc.?
Yeah, well, Frankel tops our all-time list, and that includes all the greats and so many more that we've already mentioned in this brief discussion. But also, Black Caviar is, by Timeform's reckoning, as good as any mare we've ever rated as well. She's the joint highest with her rating, with Habibti and with Allez France, the two previous best fillies or mares that Timeform has assessed. So it's clear that not only with Frankel, but also with Black Caviar, we were extremely spoilt in 2012, and just a bit wary that it might be a bit of a dull and colourless affair in 2013 without the big guns that we've been treated to.
The Timeform global rankings are out now as well, very much an international feel, UK versus the Americans, the French, the Australians as well, who courtesy of that Melbourne Cup have got one of the real sort of staying ratings discursive points. We can take a look at some of the individual categories, which includes the juveniles as well. Dawn Approach is in there. He's top of the juveniles. Black Caviar top of the sprinters. Frankel top of both the milers and the middle distance. And American top of the stayers list. Just a couple of quick questions. I know in the World Thoroughbred rankings for the juveniles, they don't have the American horses in there. Why would that be?
Yeah, this is as much of an issue, or possibly as much of an issue, certainly as far as we're concerned, as the whole recalibration process, because it's very unusual and hard to fathom why there's no American horses in the top 10 in the Well Thoroughbred rankings for juveniles, when on Timeform terms 8 of the top 10 are from America. Now, it may be that they don't believe, judging their ratings, that the American 2-year-olds were up to much, but that's very unlikely given the strength in depth of the American 2-year-olds last year, and the likes of Shanghai Bobby and Beholder, who won the respective Breeders' Cup juveniles. Shanghai Bobby won the juvenile, Beholder was the top filly for 2-year-olds out there. It just doesn't sit very comfortably for an organisation purporting to be the world body on rankings and ratings, that there is no American representation in that juveniles when we've got 8 of the top 10. And just interesting, while we're on it, none of the top 10 for Timeform rankings for the juveniles are British trained. Obviously Dawn Approach and Kingsbarns make the list, but they're both Irish trained. And just a point on Dawn Approach as well, that is an above average champion 2-year-old. A figure of 126 is higher than most champion 2-year-olds achieved, so everything looks good for him for the Classics next year. Likewise, Kingsbarns, who obviously ran to his big figure on only his second start, just 2 weeks into his racing career.
Final couple of questions. Can any European sprinter break the Aussie dominance?
I don't think so. Do you, Alex? I think we've been embarrassed, frankly, by the Southern Hemisphere as far as sprinting has gone in the last decade or so. That shows no sign of stopping, given that even with Black Caviar not at her brilliant best at Royal Ascot last year, they still had Hortensia to mop up at Goodwood and the Nunthorpe Stakes. And we're lacking a real up-and-comer, and we have done for many years amongst the sprinters. Perhaps one horse I might throw in there is Pearl Secret, obviously David Barron's horse, who went into the Nunthorpe almost as the talking horse, but came out of it the forgotten horse. And he's still lightly raced enough, and there was still more than enough promise from his earlier runs to think that he just might be the one, as far as European sprinters go, to go and break the mould.
Final question. There are a couple of horses who've been downgraded, howls of derision from some of those connected to those horses. Let me ask you this, in Timeform terms, Dancing Brave, who's been dropped £3 on the World Thoroughbred ranking, Shergar 4, El Grand Signor's been dropped as well. Dancing Brave, Shergar, El Grand Signor, for example, are they where they ought to be in the Timeform scale historically?
Yes, I think so. Dancing Brave and Shergar are rated 140 by Timeform. That's the same level as See the Stars, to put it in a more recent context. And we're certainly confident, because of the way we handicap races, the methods involved, and the fact that we've done it for so long the same way, that is a true representation that Frankel is so much a better horse than Dancing Brave, even allowing the strength of that form. That all gets taken into account every time a horse is run, and at the end of each season when you're standardising these ratings, so that you can make those valid comparisons between generations. And Frankel, all the data, all the statistics, all the figures and calculations that we have at Timeform pointed to Frankel being worth a figure of 147. And then after that, you're looking for the confidence in that rating. And his profile and his record and his accomplishments, I think, all just are the final seal the deal, so to speak.
And a yes or no, Jamie, but the recalibrated historical list that says in the paper today and has been released, is that more in line with where Timeform have things?
Yeah, because back in the 1970s, when the Well Thoroughbred rankings and the international classifications before them, they were very much on the same level as Timeform, where Timeform's rating of Dancing Brave was 140. The international classifications made him 141. Now, since then, we certainly feel that they've slipped, and we've maintained those standards. And so the post-recalibration list of the Well Thoroughbred rankings of all time certainly sits more comfortably with us than the previous one did.
We're going to let you go. I know you've got a candle to light and some Descartes to read. Thanks very much, Jamie. Good sport.
Thanks, Alex.